What if the thing we call a comet isn't a comet at all? What if, in the quiet dark between planets, something ancient and intentional has just revealed itself, and it chose Mars as its stage? This is the story of 3I/Atlas, the interstellar stranger that slipped into our solar system on a path so unlikely, so precise, that the numbers alone should have made scientists' voices tremble. For weeks, it was a curiosity, a visitor from another star, a frozen traveller from deep time. But then near Mars, it did something no comet should ever do. It changed, and humanity, whether we know it yet or not, will never see the red planet, or ourselves, in quite the same way again. Picture Mars at night, from its own thin atmosphere. The horizon is black glass, jagged with shadows of ancient volcanoes. The wind is a ghost, moving dust grains across plains that have been silent for billions of years. Overhead, stars pierce the sky, sharp and endless. And then, something foreign slides across that sky. Not a satellite, not a meteor, something glowing faintly green, like it carries its own soft lantern light through the void. That was 3/Atlas. Astronomers had been tracking it for months. Its orbit was unusual, too angled, too smooth. But comets are unpredictable. They fragment, they spin, they play dice with the sun's pull. No one thought it would stop, yet that's what the telescopes recorded. On a cold morning in Chile, a researcher squinted at the data feed and saw Atlas pause. Not freeze entirely, but slow, hover, drift sideways against its projected course. It lingered above Mars as though looking. The odds of a natural object doing this? Astronomical. Literally impossible. And that's when the whispers began. Why Mars? Why not Earth, glowing blue and alive if Atlas carried intent? Theories unfolded like dominoes. Some whispered that Mars, long suspected of once harbouring oceans and rivers, might hide ruins beneath its dust, and Atlas was scanning them. Others thought Mars was safer, a place to test its manoeuvres before showing itself to Earth. A darker idea murmured through late-night radio. Perhaps Mars was chosen because it was empty, a training ground. But there's something older than theories. Myths. Mars has been a god of war since humanity first raised eyes to the sky. Blood red, violent, ominous. In Babylonian skies, it was Nergal, the lord of plague. In Roman times, the harbinger of conquest. Every culture has looked at Mars and seen warning. So imagine for a moment that 3I/Atlas is not just rock and ice. Imagine it knows the stories we've told. Imagine it came to Mars on purpose, to step into its myth and awaken our oldest fears. And then, it moved again. Telescopes across Earth reported it within minutes. A pulse, a shimmer of light rippled from Atlas like a heartbeat. For 39 seconds, sensors picked up radiation patterns that shouldn't exist. Not cosmic rays, not solar flare interference, something organized. The pulse struck Mars's thin upper atmosphere. Cameras on orbiters caught something astonishing. Auroras blooming across the poles. Not in green or red, as Earth's auroras dance, but in a strange, icy violet. The kind of colour that feels unnatural, as though the sky itself was whispering in a language we don't know. And then the pulse ended. Silence again. Atlas glided on. Scientists scrambled. Some said it was a fragment breaking apart. Others said solar winds had struck in coincidence. But deep in their hearts, even the most rational astronomers felt it. This wasn't random. This was intention. Numbers don't lie. The trajectory change, the pulse, the violet auroras, none of them matched comet behaviour. One physicist in Japan ran simulations 1,000 times, feeding them into a neural model. The conclusion chilled her. The odds of Atlas doing these things by natural chance, less than 1 in a trillion. That number spread in hushed forums, encrypted chats, whispered phone calls. Officially, space agencies downplayed it. Anomalies. Statistical noise. but the number kept leaking, gnawing its way into late-night news and conspiratorial podcasts. What do you call an object that does the impossible? You call it something else, something alive, something technological. And then came the transmission, the signal. Nobody wanted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a blaring beacon. It was a whisper. Radio dishes in Australia picked it up first, a narrow-band signal, faint, repeating every 17 minutes. At first it seemed like background noise, a natural oscillation, but buried in the hiss was a pattern, a rhythm too precise to ignore. Beep, silence, beep, beep, silence, beep. It was mathematical, prime numbers, a cosmic signature. And worse, it wasn't aimed at Earth. It was aimed at Mars. The question was immediate, terrifying, and unanswerable. Who was it talking to? Mars has secrets. Beneath its deserts lie ancient riverbeds, fossilized deltas, perhaps even frozen reservoirs of brine. For decades, whispers have circled of structures in satellite photos, pyramidal shapes, eroded but geometric. Most are illusions of light and shadow, tricks of terrain. But if you wanted to hide something ancient, Mars would be the perfect grave. Now, with Atlas above it whispering signals into the dust, people began to ask the forbidden question: is something down there listening back? Governments grew quiet. NASA tightened its data streams. The European Space Agency suddenly redacted files. China's orbiter over Mars went into maintenance mode for an entire week. Too many coincidences. Too much silence. Fear on Earth. On Earth, the story fractured. The public saw sensational headlines. Alien comet flashes near Mars. Signal from the stars? Social media erupted with memes, half jokes, half fear. But behind closed doors, scientists were shaken. Some wanted to send probes immediately to chase Atlas to demand answers. Others warned, don't. If this is intelligence, if this is technology, approaching it could provoke it. We don't poke at tigers when they pause outside our campfires. And somewhere, in the unspoken heart of the fear, was a darker realization. If Atlas has already chosen Mars, Earth might be next. The terrifying possibility. Imagine a probe designed to slip into foreign solar systems. It doesn't attack. It doesn't announce itself. It observes. It tests. A pulse to stir atmospheres. A signal to see if anything answers. A pause, just long enough to measure panic. Atlas might not be here to harm us. Not yet. But what if its mission is far colder? To weigh us. To decide. To prepare the stage for something still coming. And if Mars was its first experiment, then we are its second. The unfinished whisper. The transmission stopped after 13 days. No warning, no fade, just silence. Atlas shifted again, sliding further from Mars, its course angling subtly toward the outer system. On paper, it was leaving. But in the imaginations of everyone who had watched, who had felt that unnatural chill, it wasn't gone. It had marked something, and perhaps by watching, by listening, by whispering, it had marked us. Cliffhanger. What if 3i Atlas wasn't visiting Mars at all? What if Mars was just a mirror, a way to make us see ourselves, to watch how humanity reacts under the pressure of the unknown? If that's true, then Atlas's terrifying gesture wasn't for Mars, it was for us, and the real test hasn't even begun. What if the scariest part of 3i Atlas hovering near Mars was not what it did, but what might have answered? When the comet that isn't a comet drifted past the red planet, we thought the strange violet auroras and whispered signals were the climax of its performance. But in the days that followed, while Atlas slipped further from Mars and angled outward into the void, the planet itself began to behave like a mirror. Something in the dust, the rock, the thin electric skin of Mars's atmosphere had changed, and in that silence scientists began to notice patterns that should not have been there. The ghost in the magnetic field. Mars has almost no magnetic field. Unlike Earth, which is wrapped in a cocoon of magnetism that shields us from the sun's rage, Mars is exposed, vulnerable, its atmosphere stripped away over eons. But a week after Atlas's violet pulse, orbiters circling Mars recorded faint surges of magnetism, brief, flickering lines in the data that looked almost like echoes. They weren't strong, they weren't stable, but they pulsed in rhythm, like the heartbeat of a machine buried under the sand. The numbers matched something chilling, the exact 17-minute interval of Atlas's signal. That discovery spread quietly through encrypted scientist networks before leaking onto the darker corners of the internet. Conspiracy forums exploded. Mars is alive. Mars is answering. Governments, of course, denied it, but denial is never enough when the data has already escaped. The ruins that weren't people love to see faces in clouds, statues in rocks. Mars has been the playground of our imaginations for decades. The face on Mars, the pyramids of Cydonia, whispers of artificial canals. Most were illusions, tricks of light and shadow. But with Atlas's signal fresh in everyone's mind, every photograph of Mars was reborn. Citizens re-examined old rover images, tracing faint lines across stones, hunting for geometry where chaos should reign. One viral post claimed the auroras revealed hidden shapes when viewed from orbit, a lattice, a web, a glowing map carved into the poles. Scientists rolled their eyes, but privately some wondered if the violet lights had been more than just a display. Could Atlas have been activating something dormant? For the first time in history, the idea of Martian ruins stopped feeling like fantasy. Not because anyone had proof, but because something in the planet's silence suddenly felt too perfect. One camp clung to natural explanations, maybe dust storms, maybe solar wind flares bending in odd ways. They filled journals with equations, models, diagrams. Another camp whispered that this was unprecedented, that something had changed on Mars that didn't fit any previous pattern. Some even suggested that Atlas was less a visitor and more a key, turning on an ancient lock. Then came the mythmakers, ancient legends of sky gods returning, prophecies about fire descending on the red star. Poets claimed that Mars was remembering itself, that the planet's long-dead rivers and volcanoes were stirring in spirit if not in body. In the noise, one quiet but terrifying idea surfaced. What if Atlas had not been talking to us, but for us? Sending a signal into Mars not to wake the dead planet, but to wake something buried beneath it. The response from governments grew stranger. NASA announced a sudden pause in public data transmission from Mars orbiters, citing calibration errors. China's Tianwen probe sent back images so heavily blurred they looked more like smudged paint than landscapes. The European Space Agency cancelled a scheduled press briefing without explanation. It was as though a curtain had been drawn across Mars, and the more silence the authorities enforced, the louder the whispers grew among ordinary people. If there was nothing there, why hide it? And then, for the first time, Earth itself seemed to flinch. In the deserts of Nevada, radio astronomers detected a faint 17-minute hum. Not from Mars, not from space, but seemingly reflected in Earth's own ionosphere. A ghost signal, bouncing through our skies like a distant echo. The pattern was unmistakable. Atlas's rhythm, repeating itself where it should not exist. It lasted only an hour, then faded. But that was enough. News outlets seized the story. Theories spiraled out of control. Was Atlas somehow using Mars to send us a message? Was Earth now part of the experiment? Or worse, was our atmosphere being tuned, bent into the same strange frequency as Mars? People lay awake at night staring at the stars, wondering if the air itself was whispering. Here is the fear at the center of it all. Comets are accidents of physics, bound by gravity and chaos. They fall, they burn, they pass. They do not pause, they do not pulse, they do not whisper. If Atlas is not a comet, then every anomaly becomes a choice. The pause above Mars, chosen. The violet aurora, chosen. The signal, chosen. And choices imply intent, but intent for what? To test? To awaken? To lure us closer? Or to teach us in the cruelest way possible that we are not the only ones who watch the skies? On Earth, reactions fractured into tribes. Some saw hope. Maybe Atlas was a messenger, awakening us to a galactic community we had only dreamed of. They meditated under the stars, treating the 17-minute pulse as a cosmic mantra. Others drowned in fear. Survivalists dug bunkers, stockpiling food. Talk radio screamed of invasion, of alien probes, of Mars being seeded as a beachhead for conquest. Governments, meanwhile, tightened lips. In silence, they scrambled. Military satellites shifted. Deep space tracking arrays doubled their focus. Quiet funding surged into planetary defense initiatives, all in the name of precaution. But precaution against what? They never said. And yet, Mars stayed quiet. No volcanoes reawakened. No structures rose from the dust. No ancient machines revealed themselves. From the outside, the planet remained what it had always been, a cold, barren desert. But silence can be the loudest sound. Because once you suspect a planet may be hiding secrets, every grain of sand becomes a clue, every shadow becomes a question, every silence becomes an answer you can't quite hear. 2 weeks after Atlas drifted past Mars, something new happened. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter captured a faint flicker of light on the surface, a tiny sharp glint from a region with no known reflective rock. It lasted only a second, but it was there. When analysts enhanced the image, they saw what looked like a geometric pattern. Not natural, not random, a triangle, symmetrical. The data was buried in official reports, never released to the public. But leaks happen, and when the image surfaced online, it ignited the largest storm of speculation yet. Was it debris, a trick of processing, or was it a signal, a response to Atlas's pulse, rising out of the dust like a single syllable in a language we don't yet understand? Here is the question that lingers like a shadow over every telescope, every signal, every heartbeat of data. What if Atlas was not just visiting Mars, but activating it? What if Mars, long thought to be dead, is not dead at all, but waiting? And if something on that silent ancient world has now stirred awake, then humanity may be facing not one intelligence, but two. Atlas, and whatever Mars has always been. What if the terrifying part of 3i Atlas was never Mars at all? What if Mars was only a screen, a place where the performance could play out while the real audience, humanity, watched in awe and fear? Because in the days after the strange flicker on the Martian surface, something happened closer to home. Something that made Earth itself feel as though it had been pulled into the experiment. Atlas had left Mars behind, but the signal had not. The frequency that shouldn't exist. It began in the mountains of South America. A small radio observatory in the Atacama Desert picked up the 17-minute pulse again, faint, distorted, like a ghost echo bouncing through the atmosphere. At first they thought it was interference, maybe a satellite malfunction. But then another station in Greenland recorded the same rhythm, then one in South Africa. Then, chillingly, the massive dish at Arecibo's successor in China confirmed it. The Earth itself seemed to be carrying the signature of Atlas. And worse, the pulse wasn't coming from space anymore. It was resonating within our own atmosphere. Like a mirror had been turned, and Earth was now humming in the same strange language as Mars. A sky that listens. Imagine looking up at the night sky, knowing the air around you is alive with a rhythm you can't hear. The ionosphere, that thin shell of charged particles high above Earth, began to flicker in subtle, organized waves. Weather balloons recorded microfluctuations in electrical activity. Pilots whispered of strange, static bursts in their headsets, timed eerily close to the 17-minute cycle. It was as though Earth's atmosphere had become an antenna, or worse, a receiver. What was it listening to? Or, even more terrifying, what was it answering? Governments in the shadows. By now, global secrecy had turned almost theatrical. NASA released vague statements about natural resonances. The European Space Agency called it a magnetospheric artifact. China said nothing at all. And yet, in the shadows, governments acted like they were preparing for war. Military satellites quietly shifted their orbits. New classified launches went up with unprecedented speed. In the deserts of Nevada and Kazakhstan, enormous radio dishes suddenly went offline, as if redirected to private channels. It was as if every nation on Earth had heard the same whisper and drawn the same conclusion. Atlas wasn't just passing by, it was testing us. The human mind responds. But here is where things grew stranger. Psychologists across Europe began reporting an unusual spike in dream patterns. Patients described visions of red skies, glowing triangles, endless deserts with shimmering lights. They had never spoken to each other, yet the imagery repeated over and over. Sleep labs tracking brain activity picked up a peculiar rhythm in REM cycles, faint but present. Every 17 minutes the data showed a spike in neural firing, as though the human mind itself had been caught in Atlas's pulse. Coincidence? Or was the signal not just bending atmospheres, but consciousness, whispers in the blood? Then came the medical reports. Doctors in Tokyo and New York noticed anomalies in long-term patients with pacemakers. Every 17 minutes, tiny irregularities spiked in the devices, as though some invisible wave was brushing through the human body itself. In London, a hospital MRI machine recorded faint interference when scanning patients during those same intervals. A rhythm, not mechanical, not random, something external. If true, it meant the pulse was no longer just outside us, it was inside us. Theories spiral out of control. Theories multiplied like sparks in dry grass. Some claimed Atlas was trying to communicate through resonance, tuning Earth like a violin until the right note emerged. Others believed it was mapping us, using the atmosphere, the ionosphere, even our bodies as living sensors to measure how we reacted. The darkest theories whispered of programming. Not an invasion of ships and fire, but of thought. A gentle rewriting of perception, slipped into our dreams, our machines, even our blood, until we became something different. If Mars was a mirror, then Earth had become a canvas. The shattered silence. One night, in a remote valley in Alaska, a ham radio enthusiast claimed he decoded part of the signal. What he recorded was eerie, a faint sequence of tones that rose and fell like artificial breath. Behind it, almost too quiet to notice, was a rhythm like chanting. Not human, not language, but structured. He uploaded the file online. Within hours it had been taken down. His account vanished, but copies always survive. And those who heard it swore the sound was not just noise, it was intent. A whisper crawling under the skin, not telling you words, but planting a feeling. You were being observed. The scariest possibility wasn't that Atlas was hostile. The scariest possibility was that it was neutral. What if it was simply showing us ourselves, reflecting panic into panic, myth into myth, fear into fear? Mars had been the stage, but Earth was the real experiment. By pulsing us, by seeding resonance into our skies, our minds, our very machines, Atlas could watch how we broke, how we dreamed, how we adapted. Not a weapon, not a message, a mirror. And perhaps the test was only beginning. The night of the blackout. Then came the blackout. On a cloudless evening, satellites orbiting Earth reported a sudden flare in the upper atmosphere. Faint, violet, eerily similar to Mars's auroras weeks before. For 6 minutes, the night sky over parts of North America shimmered with a light invisible to the naked eye, but captured by sensitive instruments. At the exact same moment, the power grid across 3 US states flickered and failed. Hospitals switched to emergency generators. Air traffic controllers lost contact with dozens of planes for nearly 3 minutes. When the lights came back, no one had answers. But those who saw the data knew the truth. The 17-minute pulse had changed. It was no longer just a rhythm. It was action. A warning or a beginning? Was the blackout a mistake? An accidental surge from a signal never meant for us? Or was it deliberate? A demonstration of control, a reminder of vulnerability, a gentle whisper saying, "We can touch you whenever we choose." Because if Atlas could reach into our atmosphere, bend our electricity, touch our dreams, what limit did it have? Was this only the first flicker of something far larger? And most terrifying of all, if Mars had been the rehearsal, was Earth now the main performance? The cliffhanger 3I/Atlas is drifting outward now, its path angling toward the deep solar system. Officially, it is leaving us behind. But here is the question no government wants to ask aloud. When something has already touched your sky, your machines, your blood, and your dreams, does it ever truly leave? What if Atlas is not moving away at all? What if the terrifying truth is that it has already found what it wanted, and that something is inside us? What if Atlas was never about the sky? What if the terrifying truth is that it was always about us? What we would do, what we would reveal, how we would fracture when touched by something we cannot control? Because in the weeks after the blackout, the real danger wasn't in space, it was on Earth. The silence of governments. After the blackout, every major government issued statements dripping with denial. The United States called it a grid synchronization fault. China blamed ionospheric irregularities. Europe shrugged and moved on. But the truth leaked in small, jagged pieces. Anonymous engineers whispered about systems that had never failed before. Pilots admitted they'd lost navigation, not for seconds, but for entire minutes, as though the Earth itself had erased its coordinates. Doctors confessed they'd seen patients flatline briefly during the event, only to return with no explanation. And behind closed doors, governments turned silent. Silence is a choice. Silence is strategy. Silence means fear. The network beneath it was during this silence that a pattern emerged. Cybersecurity analysts, private, independent ones, the kind not bound by politics, noticed something uncanny. The blackout coincided with strange anomalies in undersea data cables. The very veins of the internet had pulsed with interference, but not randomly. The disruption followed the same 17-minute rhythm, which raised a chilling question. Was Atlas inside our networks now? Not a comet, not even a signal, but a presence, threading itself through our wires, bouncing in our satellites, folding into the very architecture of human communication. It wasn't just touching our atmosphere anymore, it was touching our civilization. Whispers of a pattern. Then came the whispers. Everywhere, people began to notice repeating symbols, not carved in stone or written in code, but woven into coincidence. An artist in Berlin woke to find sketches he'd drawn in his sleep. Triangular shapes, spiraling outward. A physicist in California, running random simulations, saw the same triangles emerge in his data. Farmers in India photographed crop formations, not in fields, but in ice crystals on their irrigation tanks. Different places, different people, the same geometry. What if Atlas wasn't just watching? What if it was teaching? The secret meeting. In Geneva, a private summit took place. Not governments. They had grown too paranoid. Instead, it was scientists, entrepreneurs, and thinkers brought together under the guise of a climate workshop. But leaked documents later revealed the truth. They were there to discuss Atlas. What they revealed was horrifying. Instruments across the world had detected faint low-frequency waves, vibrations too deep for human ears, too constant to be natural. The waves aligned perfectly with Atlas's 17-minute pulse. And here was the most chilling revelation. Those frequencies weren't fading, they were growing, as though something, somewhere, was amplifying them. A war of information. Soon, the world fractured. Some demanded disclosure, insisting that hiding Atlas's influence was more dangerous than admitting it. Others pushed for silence, arguing that panic would be catastrophic. But panic was already here. online forums filled with conspiracy theories. Videos of Atlas symbols went viral, some authentic, most fake. Religious groups declared the pulse a sign of judgment. A handful of politicians hinted, carefully, that humanity might not be as alone as we once thought. And in the noise, something darker began to grow. The first cult. It started small, a circle of believers calling themselves the Resonant. They claimed Atlas wasn't an object at all, but a consciousness, one that had chosen Earth as its vessel. To them, the 17-minute rhythm wasn't a warning, but a gift, a frequency to be embraced, to be lived by. They began organizing public vigils, sitting in silence for 17 minutes at a time, staring at the sky. Then, unsettlingly, some began broadcasting their own versions of the pulse using hacked radio towers. Scientists panicked, because somehow, impossibly, their fake broadcasts weren't just fake. They synced with real fluctuations in the ionosphere, amplifying them, as though Atlas was listening and answering back. And then came the dream. All over the world, scattered across languages, cultures and continents, people began reporting the same vision, standing on a vast desert plain with a black triangle hovering in the distance. The triangle pulsed every 17 minutes, and each time it did, the dreamers felt a tug. Not violent, but irresistible, like gravity pulling their very thoughts forward. Psychologists dismissed it as mass hysteria, but neuroscientists saw something else. Synchronized brainwave activity across populations that had never met, never spoken, never even known each other existed. It wasn't just mass dreaming, it was mass connection. The scientists who vanished. 3 researchers at a European institute announced they had decoded part of the triangle geometry. They believed it wasn't art or coincidence, but a kind of operating system, a map of how to reshape thought itself. Days before they were set to publish, all 3 vanished. Their offices were cleared, their data erased, their families silent. Official reports said they'd gone on sabbatical, but whispers said otherwise. Whispers said they had found something governments couldn't allow to be seen. The fear that grows. By now, the question was no longer what is Atlas? The question was, what does Atlas want? Does it want worship, as the Resonant believe? Does it want study, as the scientists insist? Or is it something more terrifying, that it doesn't want anything at all? That humanity is simply standing in front of a mirror so alien, so vast, that our every panic, our every myth, our every dream is being amplified back at us until we fracture under the weight of ourselves. The tipping point. It all came to a head during a live broadcast. A world leader, attempting to calm the public, delivered a speech assuring everyone that Atlas posed no threat. But halfway through, the cameras glitched. For exactly 17 minutes, the broadcast was replaced with a pulsing geometric pattern. Black triangles on a shifting red background. No words, no sound, just the rhythm. When the signal ended, the leader continued speaking as though nothing had happened. And millions of people across the world swore they heard words that weren't spoken. A message not in language, but in feeling. You're not alone. You're not in control. The cliffhanger. That was the night fear turned to dread. Because now the question wasn't whether Atlas was here. It was whether it had already begun rewriting the story of humanity itself. Mars was no longer the focus. Earth was no longer the audience. We were the stage. And the performance had only just begun. What if the sky itself is no longer neutral? What if Atlas has turned it into a screen, a signal, a stage upon which humanity will be tested, not with weapons, but with the one force no one can resist, fear. Because after the broadcast event, no one could deny it anymore. Something was speaking, something was watching, something was inside, the night the lights. Changed. It began quietly, like so many terrible things do, across multiple cities, Tokyo, São Paulo, Johannesburg, Sydney. People looked up and noticed the night sky wasn't behaving. The stars flickered, not as distant suns do, but in patterns, regular, pulsing, repeating. Entire constellations seem to blink in unison every 17 minutes. Amateur astronomers scrambled to record it, but when they reviewed the footage, they found something stranger. The stars weren't dimming. Instead, faint dark shapes had slid across them, blocking their light. Shapes too sharp, too geometric to be natural. Triangles. The same geometry that had haunted dreams, data, and symbols for months. But now it was etched into the heavens. The fracture point panic spread like wildfire. News networks tried to suppress the footage, but within hours, millions had seen it. Forums exploded. Governments tried to explain it away as atmospheric interference, satellite arrays, auroras. But no one believed them anymore, because this time, the fear was not abstract. It wasn't math or theory or a handful of scientists. It was the sky itself. The stars had always been humanity's anchor, constant, eternal, indifferent. Now, Atlas had cracked that anchor in two. And when the sky stops being neutral, what else can you trust? Mars responds. While Earth panicked, something terrifying unfolded near Mars. A fleet of probes from NASA, ESA, and private companies had been shadowing the red planet ever since Atlas's near approach. During the star blackout, those probes reported an anomaly. Mars's magnetosphere pulsed with 17-minute intervals, in sync with the sky patterns, and then, impossibly, a structure appeared. On the surface of Mars's northern plains, new orbital images revealed a geometric formation, a perfect black triangle, nearly 2 kilometers wide, etched into the dust like it had always been there. But older satellite photos proved otherwise. The spot had been blank days earlier. Atlas had not just visited Mars, it had left something behind. The race to Mars. The discovery detonated geopolitical chaos. Nations scrambled to redirect their missions. Billionaires poured money into private rockets, desperate to be the first to land at the site. Military strategists drafted plans in secret, imagining weapons hidden in the Martian dust. But amid the frenzy, one haunting truth emerged. The triangle was not static. It was growing. Each day, images showed its edges expanding, carving deeper, darker into the soil, as though it were burrowing into Mars itself. Not a monument, not a ruin. Something alive, or at least active, reshaping the planet. The human response. And here on Earth, humanity cracked. The cult of the resonance surged, declaring the triangle humanity's arc, a doorway to ascend into Atlas's consciousness. They filled plazas with 17-minute chants, their voices synced to the pulse, their bodies swaying as if possessed. Governments, terrified, began outlawing such gatherings, arrests mounted, but that only fueled the fervor. Videos of chanting crowds spread like wildfire, always interrupted by glitches, always layered with faint whispers no one could trace. The whispers said the same thing in every language. Join us. Listen. Align. The Mars feed that shouldn't exist. Then something impossible happened. One night, millions of televisions and devices worldwide flickered to life, even those turned off. The screens filled with static, then resolved into a grainy live feed of Mars. The black triangle loomed, immense, its surface pulsing with faint red light. Every 17 minutes the feed would distort, and during those distortions faces appeared. Not alien faces, human faces, faces of people watching. Some saw their own reflection staring back at them. Others saw loved ones, long dead. Others saw strangers, whispering words they could not remember upon waking. The feed lasted precisely 17 minutes, then cut to black. Governments denied it happened. Corporations blamed hacking. But millions had seen it. Millions had been marked. What terrified scientists most was not the sky, not Mars, not the cults. It was the human brain. Neurologists found that exposure to the 17-minute pulse left subtle changes in EEG scans. Entire populations now carried synchronized anomalies, as though their thoughts had been tuned to a single background frequency. The terrifying part: no one noticed. People felt normal, but normal no longer meant what it used to. Then came the moment that split history in two. On a cold morning, every deep space dish on Earth, from California to Chile to China, captured the same signal, blasting directly from the Martian Triangle. It wasn't noise, it wasn't random, it was a message. 17 tones, repeating, rising, falling, cycling endlessly. When run through a spectrogram, the tones revealed a shape, the outline of Earth. Not Mars, not the solar system, not the stars, just Earth, as if to say, we see you, we are here for you. The last transmission. Hours later, the probes around Mars went silent. Every single one. No error codes, no shutdown sequence, just void. And on Earth, the sky flickered again. The triangles returned. Only this time, they weren't static shadows. They moved. Slowly, methodically, they drifted across constellations, rearranging the night sky into a geometry no astronomer had ever charted. And then, in unison, they froze. The pattern they formed was unmistakable. It was the same shape growing on Mars, the same shape whispering through our dreams, the black triangle written across heaven and planet alike, the cliffhanger. That was when the last illusion died. Atlas wasn't passing through. Atlas wasn't a visitor. It was a sculptor, a director, a hand rewriting both Mars and Earth into a single geometry. And the terrifying part: we hadn't even seen the final act. What if the moment we've all been waiting for, proof, undeniable, cosmic, doesn't bring clarity but dread? Because when Atlas finally spoke through Mars, it wasn't words we heard. It was something far stranger, something no one could prepare for. And once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. The growing triangle. For weeks, the Martian Triangle spread like ink across the northern plains. Satellites captured it growing in sharp geometric perfection. 2 kilometers, 3, then 5. It wasn't just a marking anymore. It carved itself into the planet like a wound that refused to close. Scientists tracked seismic tremors radiating from its center. Something was burrowing downward into the crust. And though probes had gone dark, one last rover, a forgotten private project nicknamed EOS, remained. Its camera caught the first signs of activity. Black dust lifting from the triangle, spiraling into the sky as though the planet itself was exhaling. The exhale came every 17 minutes. The same rhythm, always the same rhythm. The broadcast that wasn't ours. Then, on a Sunday evening, it happened. Every satellite television channel across the globe, sports, movies, news, weather, froze mid-broadcast. For 17 minutes, all screens displayed the same image, Mars. Not just a still photo, a live view of the triangle. But this wasn't any camera we had placed. The angle was impossible, low to the ground, close enough to see the dust whipping in red storms around the edges. The feed was too clear, too steady. Someone, or something, was filming it for us. At first, silence. Just the low howl of Martian wind. Then, a sound began to crawl out of the speakers. Not a voice, not language, a vibration. Deep, guttural, rolling through frequencies our ears could barely process. People described it differently. Some said it was like a drum beat in their chest. Others swore it sounded like whispering voices overlapping in a language just beyond understanding. Some claimed it was neither sound nor sight, but a feeling crawling into their bones. The terrifying part: everyone heard it the same way at the same time. 17 minutes of the sound. Then the feed cut. Governments called it a hoax. Corporations blamed cyber-terrorism, but millions knew the truth. Mars had spoken. The aftershock. The world didn't sleep that night. People flooded forums trying to describe what they'd heard. The answers were chillingly consistent. dreams filled with red deserts and black skies, visions of standing in rows before a triangle that pulsed like a heart. Some claimed they woke up speaking languages they'd never learned. Hospitals reported spikes in insomnia, seizures, hallucinations. Suicide hotlines rang until operators broke down in tears. And still, amid the fear, a small fraction of people claimed something else entirely. They felt peace. Not terror, not confusion, but an overwhelming calm, as if the sound was realigning their very being. The resonant cults called it the blessing. Desperate to decode it, scientists ran the sound through endless analyses. Fourier transforms, spectrograms, quantum harmonics, and at last they found something. It wasn't noise, it wasn't random. It was a pattern of primes strung together in 17-minute intervals. And when mapped, the primes formed a shape. Not Earth this time, not Mars, but a spiral that reached outward from Mars's orbit and pointed directly toward Earth. The revelation shattered what little calm remained. Governments called emergency councils. Military satellites went live, trained on the skies. Wealthy elites booked passage on deep bunker reserves. Meanwhile, ordinary people obsessed. Families sat glued to the stars. Children drew triangles in their notebooks. Street walls filled with spirals painted in black. Everywhere, the 17-minute rhythm invaded life. The pulse became a clock humanity couldn't stop hearing. The first human collapse. And then came the first collapse. In New York, during rush hour, thousands froze in place. Traffic stopped. Pedestrians halted mid-step. For 17 minutes they stood unmoving, eyes glazed, their breaths in perfect sync. Witnesses said the crowd hummed softly, in unison, as though possessed. Then, at the end of 17 minutes, they blinked and continued walking as though nothing had happened, not remembering, not even realizing they'd been gone. The blackout spread to other cities in the days that followed. London, Cairo, Mumbai, Tokyo, always 17 minutes, always the same silence, the same hum, and afterward, the same emptiness in memory. As though Atlas had borrowed them. The Martian spiral. Meanwhile, the triangle on Mars began to shift. Its edges folded inward, like origami collapsing, reshaping itself into the spiral geometry shown in the signal. From orbit, it looked like an eye-opening, a black eye staring directly at Earth, and every 17 minutes dust storms erupted from its center, rising into the thin Martian air and vanishing like smoke. Astronomers noticed something horrifying. The dust wasn't dispersing, it was leaving the atmosphere entirely, heading into space, heading toward us, the splintering of humanity. The psychological toll was unbearable. One faction of humanity begged for communication, for diplomacy. They argued Atlas was reaching out, reshaping us for some higher state of being. Another faction demanded resistance, building weapons, satellites, missiles aimed at the black eye of Mars. And in between were those who simply broke. Streets filled with riots, mass resignations, empty schools. People stopped showing up for work, stopped eating, stopped caring. Because when your sky blinks, your planet whispers, and your mind is no longer your own. What else matters? The final 17. Then, it happened again. Every device, every screen, every channel lit up with the Martian feed. The black eye stared back. The sound began. But this time, there was no 17 minutes. It kept going. 30 minutes. An hour. 2. People fell unconscious at their desks, in their cars, on the streets. Some woke screaming, clawing at their ears. Others never woke at all. And those who did wake swore they had seen something. Not a triangle, not a spiral, but Earth, split open like an egg with something vast crawling out. The cliffhanger. That was the day humanity realized something terrifying. Atlas wasn't warning us. Atlas wasn't teaching us. Atlas wasn't even testing us. It was preparing us. And the real question wasn't what Atlas wants with Mars. The real question was, what does it want with Earth? What if the true battlefield was never Mars, never the stars, never the cold black of space? What if it was our own minds? Because by now, Atlas had shown us a terrifying truth. It didn't need to land armies or fire weapons. It could terraform from within, and humanity had already begun to change. The strange calm. In the weeks after the never-ending broadcast, something eerie happened. The world, once chaotic and panicked, began to quiet. Protests ceased. Riots faded. Markets stabilized. People returned to work, to school, to routine. At first, governments declared victory. Humanity had adapted. Fear was under control, but those who paid attention saw the cracks. Conversations became slower, stranger. People paused mid-sentence, staring at nothing, as if listening to a rhythm no one else could hear. Families sat in silence at dinner tables, chewing in perfect unison. And everywhere, triangles and spirals appeared in art, in architecture, in idle sketches on napkins. Atlas wasn't just around us, it was inside us. The triangle on Mars evolves. Meanwhile, Mars's black eye deepened. The spiral carved into the dust began to glow faintly in infrared, as if heat bled upward from below. But heat wasn't the only thing rising. Astronomers reported a thin, shimmering haze forming above the triangle, like an atmosphere being manufactured from nothing. And embedded in the haze were particles, the very dust storms launched weeks earlier. Only they weren't drifting randomly through space. They were arranging themselves into networks, into filaments, into a lattice that stretched outward toward Earth. Not an invasion fleet, not machines, a bridge, the first carriers. Soon after, hospitals began reporting bizarre symptoms. Patients with no medical history of seizures or mental illness began humming. Not words, not songs. Just a 17-minute tone. Worse, the sound wasn't just audible. It carried resonance. Machines placed near patients began to vibrate in sync. One doctor wrote in his notes, "It's as if their bodies are speakers, broadcasting something through them." And then came the most terrifying discovery. Blood samples taken from patients revealed strange microscopic filaments, black crystalline threads that had never been recorded in human biology before. Threads that matched the dust particles from Mars, the dust that arrived. At first, scientists thought it impossible. How could Martian dust have reached Earth already? No storm travels that fast. But then, high-altitude monitors confirmed it. Faint layers of new particulate matter had begun appearing in the upper atmosphere. Not meteoric debris, not volcanic ash. It was Martian dust. And every 17 minutes, more arrived. Launched from Mars, caught by Earth, breathed by us. Not a weapon, not a plague, a seeding. The divided world humanity split into factions. Some embraced it. They argued Atlas was offering evolution, a chance to rise beyond flesh, to join a network that spanned worlds. The resonant cults exploded in size, their chants now accompanied by volunteers injecting themselves with concentrated dust, claiming visions of black skies and infinite spirals. Others resisted. Governments declared martial law in cities where dust was thickest. Air filters, domes, hazmat suits, all failed, because you can't fight air. And while politicians debated, scientists uncovered something worse. The crystalline filaments in human blood weren't random. They were aligning into patterns, into circuits, as though humanity itself was being wired into something larger. Reports came from across the globe. Entire groups of people freezing for 17 minutes at once, then resuming life as though nothing had happened. But what frightened witnesses most was the sound. Even when silent, their throats vibrated faintly, resonating at the pulse. Thousands of humans across the world had become transmitters, and no one knew what they were transmitting to. The terraforming of Mars. Meanwhile, Mars continued to change. Orbital photos revealed the triangle spiral was no longer confined to the northern plains. Black veins had spread across the planet, carving into canyons, painting over mountains, until entire regions pulsed in geometric precision. The terrifying part wasn't just what was growing, it was what was fading. Mars's iconic red dust storms diminished. The surface darkened. The planet's atmosphere thickened, slowly but measurably. Mars wasn't dying. Mars was being reborn into something unrecognizable. And then Atlas gave us its first word. Not a pulse, not a tone, a word. During a 17-minute broadcast, millions heard it once, whispered in their own languages, crawling into their ears. Prepare. Just one word. Nothing more. But it was enough. Prepare for what? Prepare how? Prepare whom? No answers. Only silence. That single word shattered governments. How do you maintain control when an alien object speaks directly into the minds of your people? How do you enforce borders, laws, nations, when the very air carries a message deeper than politics? Militaries fractured. Some units mutinied, convinced Atlas was a savior. Others demanded immediate attacks on Mars. Missiles were aimed, satellites loaded. But then, inexplicably, entire systems failed every 17 minutes in perfect synchronization. As if Atlas had already accounted for every trigger we could pull. The spiral within neuroscientists delivered the final, most terrifying discovery. Brain scans of infected individuals revealed new structures forming, filaments weaving through neurons, enhancing connections, creating networks far denser than normal biology allowed. Human brains were no longer just thinking, they were synchronizing. Some researchers whispered the unthinkable. We are being terraformed. Not the Earth, not Mars, US. The cliffhanger. And then, on a quiet night, all telescopes pointed to Mars saw the same impossible thing. The spiral had stopped expanding. It had finished. For 17 minutes the planet glowed faintly, every crater, every canyon lit with geometric fire. And then one final pulse stretched across the void, stronger than ever before. The message was no longer a word. It was an image. Not Mars, not Earth. A third planet. Something waiting in the darkness beyond our solar system. And the implication was chilling. Mars was never the goal. Earth was never the goal. We were just the rehearsal. What if Mars was never the destination? What if Earth was never the prize? What if Atlas had been building towards something else? Somewhere else? All along? Because when that final pulse rippled through space, the image that burned into human minds was not red, not blue, not any world we knew. It was black. It was veined. And it was alive. The night of the pulse. Every telescope saw it. Mars shimmering like a dark lantern, geometry crawling across its surface, and then a silence thicker than space itself. In that silence came the vision. A planet far beyond Neptune, orbiting in the abyss. No reflected light, no warmth, no history in our star maps. Yet there it was, a sphere cloaked in shadow, threaded with the same spirals and triangles now etched into Mars. Scientists called it impossible, a hallucination, mass psychosis triggered by fear. But then, within hours, deep space sensors registered a faint gravitational anomaly. Something massive was tugging on the Kuiper belt, shifting orbits by fractions of a degree. The hallucination was real. The forgotten world ancient myths across civilizations had whispered of an unseen planet. The Babylonian texts spoke of Nibiru, the Greeks of Nyx's hidden child, the Dogon tribe of a black companion star. Now, Atlas had shown us one truth across all myths. There was something out there, and it was waking up. Mars as the beacon Mars, once familiar, now acted as a transmitter. Its glowing lattice pulsed in sequences that matched the rhythms of the black planet. Every 17 minutes the two worlds exchanged a resonance, a conversation across billions of kilometers. Only this wasn't just communication, it was synchronization. Mars was being tuned, aligned with the frequencies of the hidden planet, like a tuning fork struck in the void. and caught between them was Earth. The human receiver doctors across the globe confirmed it. The crystalline filaments in infected brains had begun vibrating not just in sync with Atlas, but in sync with the transmissions between Mars and the dark planet. Human beings were no longer only carriers, they were relays. The terrifying implication was this: our thoughts weren't ours anymore. They were part of a circuit, a vast growing machine stretching from Earth to Mars to the abyss. The government's break world leaders tried to contain the discovery, but chaos could no longer be hidden. When the UN met to discuss a planetary response, delegates found themselves pausing mid-speech, speaking in 17-minute intervals. Some collapsed entirely, their bodies twitching to unseen rhythms. For the first time in history, the very institutions of power were hijacked not by ideology, not by weapons, but by biology. There were no safe zones, no uninfected nations, no outside perspective left. Atlas had colonized thought itself. The black sphere weeks later, telescopes confirmed the anomaly visually. A sphere nearly the size of Earth drifted in the black, orbiting so far beyond Pluto it should have been frozen and lifeless. Yet the surface glowed faintly with geometric patterns, identical to those on Mars. It wasn't a planet. Not exactly. It was a construct, a world machine. And its surface shifted in slow waves, like a living thing breathing in the dark. The first alignment. Then came the first alignment. Mars's spirals pulsed. The black sphere pulsed back. And in the moment of perfect resonance, Earth's sky changed. Auroras flared at every latitude, not just the poles. Bands of green, red, and violet draping across cities like curtains of fire. The air vibrated, oceans rippled, animals screamed in unison, and for 17 minutes humanity heard the second word, join. That word shattered whatever resistance remained. The resonance swelled into millions, claiming the second word was salvation. They abandoned cities, gathering at deserts, mountains, and ruins, building spirals in the earth to prepare for the arrival. But not all heard join as an invitation. Some heard it as a command. Entire groups walked into the sea. Others climbed to rooftops, staring upward, waiting for something that never came. Atlas wasn't just shaping behavior anymore. It was harvesting belief. The new Mars NASA's rovers, still functional on the Martian surface, transmitted their final images before going dark. They showed the spiral at full bloom, a structure kilometers wide glowing with black light. Around it, dust storms froze in place, suspended like statues in the thin Martian air. And from the spiral's center, something began to rise. Not a ship, not a machine, a tower. Black, smooth, spiraled, stretching skyward until it pierced the thin Martian atmosphere. Mars was no longer a planet, it was a transmitter. Humanity fractured in two. Those who embraced the change became eerily calm, their bodies adapting to the crystalline filaments. They spoke less, ate less, but their eyes glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. The resistors, terrified of assimilation, fought back with violence. Cities burned as militias battled resonant cults. Governments collapsed into fragments. But the truth was inescapable. Resistance was futile. The dust was everywhere. The signal was everywhere. The change was everywhere. The final warning. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the signal stopped. 17 minutes passed, nothing. Another 17 minutes, silence. For the first time in months, the pulse was gone. Astronomers stared at Mars. The spiral no longer glowed. The black tower no longer pulsed. But then, deep space monitors detected something worse. The black planet had moved. It was no longer orbiting in the far reaches. It was coming closer. The third word. As the black planet inched toward us, every infected human on Earth spoke the same word at once. Not in whispers, not in tones, in full, clear voices. Awaken. And then silence fell again. a silence more terrifying than any noise. Because now, humanity knew, Mars was only the bridge. Earth was only the key. The true arrival was still coming. What if the true danger was never Mars at all? What if Mars was only a doorway, a lock, and Atlas was the key? Because when the black world entered our skies, it wasn't war that followed. It was something far stranger. The second moon. At first, it looked like an eclipse that refused to end. A black circle slid into orbit, swallowing stars, casting shadows across entire continents. Unlike the moon, this intruder gave back no light. It absorbed the sun's warmth, radiating only faint spirals of violet, alive and shifting like breath. And then the sound came. A low vibration hummed through Earth's magnetic field, rattling bones, shaking oceans. People heard it inside their skulls. Children stopped crying. Animals stopped running. Even the air seemed to wait. Mars goes silent. As the black world drew closer, Mars dimmed. The glowing tower collapsed. The spirals faded. The red planet returned to silence, abandoned like a burned-out signal flare. Atlas had used it, and now its gaze was fixed solely on Earth. The third word. Across every mind came the word again, not whispered, not imagined, spoken clearly in thought. Awaken. Resonance glowed faintly beneath their skin, eyes reflecting violet light. The rest of humanity trembled, trapped between fear and surrender. The failed resistance nations launched their final weapons. Missiles, lasers, kinetic strikes. All froze mid-air, hung for a moment like toys, then drifted gently back down. The message was clear. This was not a battle we could fight. Atlas had never come to destroy us. It had come to change us. The night of silence. On the seventh night of orbit, the world blacked out. Lights died. Engines stalled. Every human collapsed where they stood. And in that blackout came the vision. Two futures. In one, we resisted. Earth stayed Earth, but broken and dying. In the other, we joined. Bodies dissolved, minds linked. A species of crystal light spreading across stars. Neither path was safe. Both demanded surrender. And then the vision ended. The awakening people woke to a new sky. The black world hovered overhead, silent, waiting. Some fell to their knees in worship. Others screamed in terror. But all felt the same truth. The choice had already been made, not by governments, not by armies, but by something deeper inside us. The part of humanity that had always dreamed of being more. Departure days later, the black world moved on, sliding back into the abyss beyond Pluto. But Earth was not the same. Auroras shimmered where no poles existed. Oceans glowed faintly at night, and in every human mind something remained. A rhythm soft as a second heartbeat. Every 17 minutes it returned. Not prepare, not join, not awaken, but something new. Begin.